Hello, everyone. I'm Emma Howard-Boyd, and I am chair of the Environment Agency in England with responsibility for environmental regulation and flood and coastal erosion risk management. I'm delighted to be one of the global ambassadors for Race to Zero and Race to Resilience.
Hello, Emma. I am Manuel Pulgar Vidal. I am currently the Climate and Energy Global Practice Leader with WWF International and used to be Minister of the Environment of Peru in between 2011 and 2016. And as for that, the President of the COP20 in 2014. And I am more than happy that have this chat with you to talk on how to bridge this link in between mitigation and adaptation. And as you know, Emma, we are sharing this position as global ambassadors for the Race to Zero. So how do you think we can amplify the voice to build that bridge in between mitigation and adaptation? That it is urgent. It is urgent. We are focusing strongly in mitigation, but we do need to bring more strongly adaptation into the arena. So how can we do that as global ambassadors?
So Manuel, I have a background in finance, and I think I'd be one of the first people to recognize that very early on, my focus has been on mitigation, the transition to a low carbon world, the race to net zero. But with the responsibilities that we have at the Environment Agency, not just for preparing for floods and protecting individuals and communities from the growing flood activities that we're seeing here in the UK, the responsibility also around water resource management, so integrated water, the flip side of too much water, too little water. It's become increasingly clear to me over the last decade how important it is to focus on preparing for climate shocks, adapting to those climate shocks, but also being ready to recover as we see an increasing number of events take place around the world, whether it's too much water, too little water, too hot, too cold, and wildfires. And I had the huge privilege of being appointed as the UK's Commissioner to the Global Commission on Adaptation. This felt like it was one of the first moments when the global stage gave a profile to adaptation. And that sunsetted back in January, had some amazing people as commissioners from around the world. And I was hugely supportive, delighted to be invited to become a global ambassador, to make sure that the work of the Commission continues in the run-up, not just to this next COP26, but beyond that, and to have an equal weighting, an equal place and focus alongside the incredibly urgent race to zero.
Yeah, that is fantastic. I remember well that flagship report of the Global Commission on Adaptation. And I remember that three phases: understanding, planning, finance, that it is key to build that bridge between mitigation and adaptation. And before of talking about the race to zero and race to resilience, I would like to remind, because for me that is important, that in Paris, when we define those commitments for mitigation and adaptation, we define commitment in relation to adaptation first to develop and implement national adaptation plans. Unfortunately, Emma, until now, just 22 countries have put on the table their NAPs. So we do need to understand what is happening. Why just 22 countries, that it is 10% of the world, has already understood the importance of those plans. Also, we committed to build capacity and to work strongly and strengthen that capacity, mostly in the national levels, to develop metrics, to scale up finance, and to link with that Sendai framework to manage risk disaster. So the point it is that we have already committed to that. The Global Commission on Adaptation, through its flagship report, made strongly good. But fortunately, with this Race to Zero campaign, plus the Race to Resilience, I think that that is complementing perfectly. And based on that, we can really move our actions toward strengthening the adaptation agenda. Because in some way, the Race to Resilience, it's doing something that for me it is important. It is defining some metric. It is saying that by defining actions, but clear actions, we can really address resilience for 4 billion people, mostly in poorest countries. But to do that, we do need to have pledges strongly based on science, but on the other hand, with metric to measure progress. So I think that the Race to Zero and the breakthroughs to that, sectorial breakthroughs to the net zero, plus the Race to Resilience, it is complementing all what we have already decided since 2015 with the Paris Agreement. So I am strongly optimistic that through those two campaigns, we can make countries to understand the importance of, as the Global Commission on Adaptation said, understand, plan, and finance. Do you agree with that, Emma?
I certainly do. And I think that emphasis on finance, we know from that flagship report and analysis that has been done since the Paris COP and the agreement, how little of the private sector is contributing to the resilience agenda. The additional money that's come from the private sector tends to be focused on the transition to a low carbon economy, the net zero aspect of this. But I am increasingly concerned. Yes, we need to be looking after those parts of the world that are absolutely on the forefront of climate disasters. But we also need to be preparing the whole world, both developed and developing countries, for the climate shocks that we're beginning to see. And this is where we also need to crowd in private sector funding to make sure that resilience is built into all of the infrastructure that we know needs to be invested in over this next decade. Otherwise, we may find ourselves having invested in all the renewable technologies that we need, or the net zero technologies we need, that they could ultimately wash away in a flood or melt in a heat wave. But so it's that focus on those vulnerable countries, absolutely key, but we mustn't forget the focus too on developed countries preparing for climate shocks. I read some extraordinary analysis from the States in an article written for the New York Times, which showed that last year, something like £47 billion of federal government, US federal government money was spent on recovering from climate shocks, 7 times more than the amount of money spent by the federal government on preparing for those climate shocks. We need to turn that on its head and make sure that we are thinking about resilience in all of the infrastructure that we're building, but also make sure that we're thinking about agriculture, other ways of making sure that we're going to be ready for those growing shocks that we're already seeing right now.
Yeah, and you have said something that it is extremely important. We cannot achieve mitigation objective without adaptation. I think that is a key phrase in this chat, because it is the only way to really see the big picture and address the level of this crisis. And you know that by thinking on finance, that it is a topic that you are raising, I am sure that you have read this G7 communique, no? by the Minister of Environment and Energy. It's an amazing one. It's an extraordinary one, because in my point of view, this communique first, it is creating this idea of convergence. We are in a time in which we are trying to make converge our climate objective in mitigation and adaptation with our nature objective based on this concept of nature positive, and also health with the idea of the One Health approach. In that sense, that is fantastic, because we cannot address sustainability by not addressing the 3 main objectives that the G7 communique it is talking about. And also in one of the paragraphs, in the 21, This communique is referring to the need to enhance and accelerate actions towards adaptation and resilience, to use nature-based solutions, to encourage countries to develop their national adaptation plans, to scale up financial resources, that is something that you are talking about, and for me, that is extremely important, to recognize the race to resilience as a mechanism that can encourage actors, not only countries, but non-state actors to do that, and to work in communicate, in create more outreach around the adaptation agenda. So in my point of view, Emma, it is good to have G7 saying that, but the point is how can we make this to percolate into developing countries? And let me say a couple of things, or 2 or 3 things around that. First, I see that science is helping us a lot. The 3 main reports of the IPCC of the last 18 months, the 1.5, the desertification and drought, and the oceans and the cryosphere, plus the IPBES, the Intergovernmental Panel on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, are good pieces that can make us able to understand better what is the level of the task that we have in front of us. We shouldn't leave to government to produce 3 different plans in charge of 3 different authorities. We should work in trying to have them working together, because it is about mitigation, adaptation, and also to address biodiversity loss. And also, we should work in making more visible the vision in between climate and nature. We are close to celebrating the CBD COP15 in Kunming in China, in which we are planning, I hope, to achieve a good outcome, that it is going to complement perfectly the climate one. So what do you think, Emma, it could be the best way to engage this nature and climate relation? How can we strengthen that relation?
One of the things I'm really keen that we're able to do is show real examples of the join up between the race to zero, the race to resilience, the growing call for whether it's a race to restore nature or a race to abundance, but that whole challenge on nature positive. And one of the things that I'm doing with the work that colleagues at the Environment Agency are delivering here in the UK is showing real stuff that is happening right now to join those dots up, to show how we are working at a river catchment level in a local environment, and showing how as we bring in better protection and preparedness for flooding, we're also restoring nature as well. And I think this is where we as global ambassadors can bring to life these huge agreements that and commitments that are being made by governments and supported by businesses and investors to real things happening on the ground, which show what is possible. And that is where the fact that we come from different parts of the world, but also understand how different solutions are relevant for different countries and different geographies and different localities, and how local solutions have to be so much part of what we're trying to do. And I think this is where we can show how by racing together, this is a race that we all have to win, that nobody can be left behind, and that emphasis on real things happening over time. You've shown, Manuel, through your previous experience as a minister and as a COP president, how steeped you are in understanding the importance of the global international frameworks that exist to drive change. But we know how vital it is that this is the decade where we start delivering on that change and showing year by year, month by month, not that this is something that is on the drawing board for 2050, but that we have plans annually on a 5-year basis to deliver solutions, and that integration between preparing for the transition to net zero, but restoring nature as well, and give real examples of how that can take place.
Yeah, and it is true. This is the time to deliver. And you know, Egma, that I celebrate to have the UK as the host country of the COP26, because I think that the UK, it is understanding well that we are in a time to implement and to deliver. So it is different of the time that we used to have in 2015, in which, despite of the complexity, we knew that we should achieve a single outcome, an agreement, and fortunately we got it. Now it is a different time. It is a time for implementation. And in that sense, what the UK government is doing by balancing and prioritizing different topics, I think it is the best way to move this forward. So it is about mitigation for sure, and the NDCs and the long-term strategy. It is about finance. It is about adaptation. It is about converging nature and climate. And it is interesting the strong position that the UK government has in relation to nature, that it is also a priority. Despite that the debate of COP26 is climate, I think that the UK government is doing great by saying, okay, it's climate, but with nature. And finally, the non-state actors agenda, in which we are working in scaling it up, no? That agenda, and the race to zero and the race to resilience are helping to move that, with fortunately two strong champions from Chile, Gonzalo, and from the UK, Nigel. No? So we are building that strong momentum. I think that the 2021, I am fully optimistic that will be a fantastic year, and it's going to leave a legacy for the future. For me, that is a key element. So the point is how, by using these campaigns, Race to Zero, Race to Resilience, we can, you mentioned that this is a race, but not a competition. It is interesting because by the end, we want to have everybody winning this race.
And again, this is where we can take the experience of the work that's been done around the world on net zero and learn from those coalitions, so that we continue to reinforce that this is a whole world issue.
For me, something that, based on my experience when I started, when I was president of COP20 in 2014, and we launched what it was called at that time the Lima Paris Action Agenda, that it was the seat of the non-state actors, the current non-state actors agenda. We did it just to convene. No? So we decided, okay, let's open a room with this agenda and let's convene actors. That agenda has already scaled it up into have well-organized sectors, defining targets, and I think that we are entering into a new time in which, through the Race to Zero, we are demanding and encouraging to have more ambitious targets, well supported on science. So it is a good evolution of that agenda. And with the Race to Resilience, we are complementing that. And one element, and this is something that I would like to have also your thoughts. It is that, fortunately, what it is clear to most of the actors of the world, or becoming at least more clear, it is that we are sharing a collective vision. And that is key. We know what we want to be by 2050. We want to be a net zero economy and a resilient economy. And it is by sharing a collective vision that we can move all together into the same. So the idea of keep that vision, it is key, despite of the political difficulties, because look what happened in the former 4 years in the US. Despite of the political difficulties, the non-state actors kept alive the climate agenda. So by having the vision, you can do that. The point it is what it should be the short-term action now, mostly in adaptation, to link with the long-term vision. No? For me, it could be to continue encouraging for national adaptation plans, or to encourage non-state actors to be part of the race to resilience. No? What do you think it could be, that short-term action to link with the long-term vision?
I'm hugely encouraged by some of the action that we have seen on the climate agenda led by investors over recent times, particularly challenged to specific boards of the oil majors to really start addressing climate change in a meaningful way. And one of the things that we need to learn from resilience and the role of nature-based solutions is how we accelerate the progress that needs to be made on those agenda to match the action that we're now finally seeing around net zero. So this is where those of us that have been very much part of the climate movement for, in my case, several decades, and have a far better understanding now of how all of this joins up, that we learn from the work that we have done in the past to jump ahead much more quickly on joining the races up, and allow those races that perhaps started a little bit later to catch up. It's almost like a new type of relay race to make sure that we embrace nature and resilience, but accelerate with real action alongside the achievements that we're now making from a net zero perspective. We have to continue to make this relevant also to the general public. And that is where we almost need to, as ambassadors, to act as translators. And I think you, given your role with WWF and the outreach that WWF has an organization and similar environmental NGOs with huge membership, huge following, we need to learn from the communication expertise, the engagement that can be done working with people like David Attenborough, who has certainly accelerated the understanding of nature through his extraordinary programs. And again, he'll be playing a role in COP26 as a people ambassador. These are the sorts of things that we have to build on quite quickly to make sure that it translates into action right now, as opposed to what can often be seen as something that is fraught with delay and spread over many, many decades. I don't know whether you have plans to add to the experience that organizations like WWF can bring to the global action that's taking place.
Yeah, no, you have mentioned a key element. Make simple the message. No, that is the role that organizations as WWF could play, but really all the actors. Because when we think about nature-based solutions, that it could sound like what exactly it is. No, by translating it into a more simple way, we can make countries to really adopt this mechanism to address the climate crisis by using nature in a sustainable way. No, so that is a really extremely important mechanism. And there are many others, but that is one that I really would like to raise. I think, Egma, that we are running out of time. It has been fantastic to have this chat with you. And also in a time in which we are celebrating. We are celebrating the first anniversary of the Race to Zero. We are in a very, very important UN Global Compact Leaders Summit. And I hope that by this chat, more actors could really embrace the races, move their actions, define their pledges, and help the world to achieve their objective and to move it into that vision of net zero, resilient economy, and nature positive. So it has been fantastic, Egma, to have this chat. And over to you to close. And thank you for this time.
It's been a brilliant conversation. You are so right that we need to celebrate the action that's already taken place, but alongside encourage more people to get involved in the campaigns to deliver real change and with real urgency. So fantastic as ever to discuss these issues with you. Let's keep on working together and bring others on side as well. Thank you.